We are, I guess, narrowing down the list of Suns head coaching candidates. Wolf, we're down to 8 or 9 right now.
We're
Sounds like
trying
9.
to.
Okay,
We're endeavoring, but we're a little dependent on the Suns.
Well, Gambo pointed this out last week that there's a pretty good chance this list gets whittled down to about 3 names by next week. One of the names on there is Chris Quinn, Miami Heat assistant. And we figured, like, a lot of these names, if you're Suns fan driving around here at work, right now they're just, a lot of these are just names because a lot of them are assistants. So figured, man, it'd be good to learn about some of these guys more specifically. We're going to talk to Brendan Tobin, host of Tobin and Leroy on AM 560 in Miami right now. He's joining us on the Arizona Sports Line. Brendan, thank you for the time. How are you doing?
I'm great, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess let's just start with Chris Quinn. We got a few different things we want to ask you, but Chris Quinn, just your impressions of him and what he might be like if he got a head coaching job in the NBA.
Yeah, I think he'd be pretty sensational. Everybody has been talking in that Heat organization that, he is, the next guy to take over. Even if Eric Spoelstra were to ever get burnt out, like everybody would be confident that Chris Quinn would probably be the next guy. That's not to say that he's like an heir apparent because he has gone out in interviews the last couple of years. I think he was one of the finalists for the Lakers job, even though that was, kind of all circulated to go to JJ Redick anyway. But a guy who has a lot of respect in that organization. He actually even got promoted up this year after that whole interview cycle to associate head coach. Has the respect of Eric Spoelstra, was a former player with the Miami Heat. And, is hands-on with a lot of these guys. And I think, to you guys in Phoenix, the thing that is interesting is with Tyler Hero, that's one of the guys that Quinn warms up with every single game. Tyler's idol, coming into the league was Devin Booker. So, I think with all the work that he's done with Tyler Hero, that's something that I feel like he could get accumulated to that style pretty quickly. But he's raved about in the organization, even the times he's had to step in for Spo and the few times where like he's missed a game for personal reasons. Everybody respects him.
So, Brendan, what would you say is the demeanor of Chris Quinn? What is his demeanor like in terms of coaching?
It's interesting because I don't know as far as a head coach what it can be right now, because his job in a lot of ways is to almost be like the holdback coach on Eric Spoelstra. Like Eric Spoelstra is very animated during games, and Chris Quinn is in charge of basically substitutions, replays. Obviously we'll do game plan and all that, but like in the middle of games, like he almost has to keep cool as part of his job description right now. But I think he's always looked upon a guy that, does put a challenge. You talk about like a lot of the undrafted guys who have come through the system, Duncan Robinson, Max Strus, like he's had a big hand in a lot of those guys in their development and breathing their confidence. I do think that warming up pre games, like he's very relaxed with his players. There'll be times where like Duncan Robinson and Bam Adebayo warm up together, and one of the things that is that they always have to wait out for is Bam doing this like layup drill under the basket with Malik Allen, and so Chris Quinn will like basically do one-on-one for Duncan Robinson, like trying to get by Duncan Robinson, cross him up, and get in drills like that, and they'll get into arguments about like, did you reach? Was that a travel? All that type of stuff. So, you can keep it loose with that stuff beforehand, but it's funny, like a lot of times I'm sitting there with my camera on the sidelines, and they're asking me for like replays on it. So he's a guy that does, have a player's touch, gets along with a lot of these guys. Of course, he was a former player. So he does have that respect and all that. It is funny enough, though, like it does think with the Phoenix tie, like of Shaq disparaging him back with the last year with the Miami Heat. But he's definitely found his niche with this organization and has a big hand in a lot of the things that they prepare for.
We're talking to Brendan Tobin. Brendan, sticking with the Chris Quinn conversation, how big is he? I know Heat culture is obviously a big thing. The Suns are looking to rebuild their culture. When you think Chris Quinn, do you think culture guy?
Yeah, especially, going back to what I was mentioning about like having a hand in a lot of the undrafted guys that you guys saw with all those big playoff runs. Like he does have an instrumental part in a lot of that thing. And the thing that is interesting with the Heat culture, that gets thrown around so much is it's very much like the guys who are about it, they have like everybody on the coaching staff has basically played for the Miami Heat with Chris Quinn, Caron Butler, Malik Allen, Wayne Ellington. I think Eric Glass is the only guy who didn't actually play for the Miami Heat, but he's basically been with the Miami Heat for a while. So yeah, I think he is going to bring a lot of that. And I think the thing that's, I'm sure, was a learning experience for him this year, because this was probably the most tumultuous Heat season they have had since the departure of Shaquille O'Neal, with all the stuff that happened with Jimmy Butler. So I think you come into that, even Eric Spoelstra was saying, like, that was an experience he's never had as a head coach, even if he's been around it. So I think all of the coaching staff got a bit of a lesson of just getting to work, because these guys really had to get all of the players, and it wasn't easy. And they'll tell you that, it was a rough thing to deal with, but they all had to kind of just get them to bury their heads to get focused on a basketball game because of what was going on with all the drama with Jimmy Butler this year. And I think Chris Quinn had a hand in that as well.
Yeah, I've got to ask you this, Brenda, because Jimmy Butler has been one of my favorite players in the league until he started forcing his way out of Miami. Can you give us any insight as to what really happened?
Yeah, it was a really fascinating season for sure, because the press conference, the infamous press conference with Riley last year, where he said, if you're not on the court, to keep your mouth shut. I asked Pat to lead to that. I was just asking him, like, because of Jimmy's comments, did he feel like they were still in line with the Celtics? And they kind of went on this whole praise about the Celtics and led to that bubble moment, but the initial problem, even before those comments, was they weren't going to pay Jimmy Butler. And I think the Heat, with their misfire, was they thought, with time, with accomplishments, with Jimmy still having 2 guaranteed years left, the year he was playing, and a player option, that he was going to handle this more maturely, and that there wasn't going to be some gasoline poured on a situation that, yeah, maybe he was annoyed by, but, they did want to see a year where, what does Jimmy Butler at this age look like? Because they were very wary about paying him 37, 38 years old, $60 million for one season. And the answer that they got was no. Jimmy Butler, when it comes to his money, is going to go full Timberwolves, now Miami Heat Jimmy Butler. He knows how to nuke the situation. So basically, it got to a point this year. There was a game, I think it was against the Thunder, I want to say, where he sprained his ankle, and this was right after he had one of his best games of the season. But we all saw it. We're like, oh, that was a nasty turn. But he said after the game, or it was reported to the media that he was sick. And so, like, he was basically out for this pocket of games where he was supposedly sick, even though we all saw his ankle get twisted. And that just started drama with, like, he was playing dominoes in the locker room with his agent. But the Heat would, like, strangely went on one of their best runs of the season. So, like, it didn't really explode until he got back on the court, when he eventually had to come back. And that's when he was doing, like, one-legged threes, but they were playing the Pelicans, so it's impossible to lose a game against the Pelicans. And then finally it really came to a crescendo against the Pacers, and that's when you had the whole joy thing come out there where he was done with it.
Yeah, Brendan, I can tell you firsthand, apparently it's not impossible to lose multiple games to the Pelicans, at least not here in Phoenix. Real quick before we let you go, I just wanted to ask you, because there's a lot of teams being thrown out as potential trade partners for Kevin Durant. Is Miami, I've heard Miami's name. Is that something from your perspective that would make sense to the Heat?
Oh, man, I think that's the guy everybody has their bulls on. If they could get the perfect guy for their team, it would be Kevin Durant. I guess the question is, like, what are those negotiations going to be like? Because I don't imagine Phoenix wants to give him away for nothing. And, the Heat get pretty stingy in these negotiations. They didn't haul in Damian Lillard. They didn't really want to get in the game for Donovan Mitchell. So I guess the question remains, like, what are they willing to part with for Kevin Durant? I do think they're more open to doing all the stuff, because around these parts, they're not used to being 10 games under 500. Making the playoffs as a 10 seed was nice, but they get their faces crushed in by a record margin in the first round. So I think they're more open to doing anything. I would say for a Kevin Durant trade, the only guys I'd imagine are off the table are Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero. I think they really like to not part with Kel'el Ware. So I'd say everybody else is there, but I'm not saying it's a 0 chance that they would part with Kel'el Ware. I just think that's like, if I had to say, it's untouchable, Bam and Tyler for Kevin Durant, and then Kel'el Ware, it would be him and then no picks. Like, that would be, like, they would have to be, I think, swayed something like that to do the KD trade.
Well, Brendan, we appreciate this, man. Thank you for the insight.
Buddy.
Yeah, thank you guys. Anytime.
All right. That's Brendan Tobin, host of Tobin and Leroy on AM 560 in Miami, joining us right there on the Arizona Sports Line. Nice to get the Miami perspective on some of this. I'm interested. I'm very interested in Chris Quinn in that sense. If start to try and separate some of these names from some of the others on this list, and that would be one to keep an eye on, especially if he's Eric Spoelstra's right-hand guy. Like that's probably pretty good coaching experience at the NBA level.
Thanks for watching Wolf and Luke. Tap to see more and click the button in the middle to subscribe to Arizona Sports.